Chapter 5. The proprietor of the Lone Star Hotel was a portly man with a bald head and a glossy black mustache. He was dozing in the otherwise empty lobby when the two men from Powder Valley walked in. He sat up and yawned and blinked at them, mechanically brushing spilled cigar ashes from the front of his broadcloth vest. "Come right in, gentlemen." The heartiness of his greeting was marred by another yawn. He got up and waddled to the desk and shoved a register towards them. "Sign there if you would like a room." "Have we got to sign out right names?" Pat asked, taking a stubby pen and dipping it into the inkwell. The proprietor stroked his mustache and looking them over carefully. Then he sighed and admitted, "Not many do, I'm afraid, but it isn't any of my business." "That being the case," said Pat gravely, "I'll just sign her. How does Pat Stevens sound?" he asked Ezra with a weighty frown. "Oh, sounds right familiar. I don't see." "Yeah, it's a good sounding name," Pat interrupted quickly. "I'll just put down from Dutch Springs, Colorado. It rounds it off, sorta." He boldly signed his correct name and residence and asked the proprietor, "Do you have a double room somewhere around the number 17? "How long will you be here for?" "Just for tonight. We'll be riding south in the morning." The proprietor nodded his bald head sadly. "Most fellas are heading south when they stop by in Marfa. I'll give you gents number 19, right across from 17 upstairs. That'll be $10 for the two of you, cash." Pat said, "Don't seem like nobody trusts anybody here in Marfa." He put $3 silver on the counter. "That's my price for the room, mister." The fat man looked down at the $3. "I said 10. "And 3's what you're getting." He shook his head. "I don't believe you'd want word to get around that you're just stopping overnight on the way to the border. The sheriff might get interested." "Are you," Pat asked harshly, "another brother-in-law of the sheriff?" "Now, that's a funny question. We're not related, but—" Pat replied quickly, "We'll go up to the room." He turned away, leaving the $3 silver laying on the desk. Ezra followed him to the back of the lobby and up the narrow stairway, which made an abrupt turn at a landing halfway up. The upper hallway was lit with one lantern hanging from the ceiling by a piece of baling wire. Number 19 was halfway down the hall. The door was unlocked. Pat struck a match as he went in and found a lamp sitting on the washstand and lit it. There was a double bed and one chair in the room. A single window looked out over the main street of Marfa. Pat got the window open while Ezra curiously let his weight down upon the bed. The ancient springs creaked, but they held up under him. "Mattress is kind of lumpy," he announced cheerfully, "but she'll sleep better in the ground under a saddle blanket. $3, though, is plenty high for just one night." He sighed and leaned forward to pull off one boot. Pat put in, "I figure it was a fair price, but better not pull off more'n your boots, Ezra." The red-headed man squinted his one eye up at Pat. "You know, I don't sleep good on a mattress with my clothes on." "I'll sleep on the floor, then." Bewildered, Ezra tried to argue. "Aw, Pat, you know danged well." "I know that neither one of us is going to be sleeping much till midnight, or until Dusty Morgan comes into the room across the hall." Ezra kicked off his other boot and stretched out with a sigh of contentment. "You looking for trouble tonight?" I'm not looking for it, but you heard what the sheriff told Dusty and what Dusty said about it." Ezra looked interested. "You figure Dusty's taking a run out before midnight, riding his own horses and ruining the swap we had all fixed with him?" Pat grunted. "I'm afraid he'll get in worse trouble by bucking the sheriff." "Why are you worrying so much about Dusty?" Ezra demanded. "The way he jumped us for helping him tonight plumb disgusted me. Let him chaw his own tough meat from now on." Pat Stevens was rolling a cigarette slowly. He shook his head. "We're hooked up with him whether we like it or not. He put in his oar for us at the livery stable. But that don't mean we gotta coddle him from here on out, particular after he jumped you for stopping the sheriff from killing him." Pat licked a cigarette and lit it with a frown of consternation. You can't blame him so much for feeling that way. He was mad and shamed in front of the whole gang. He ain't old enough to know it's smart to be careful. He won't never get old enough to learn any sense if he keeps on like he started," Ezra muttered with disgust. Pat shrugged his shoulders. "I recollect a time when you jumped a gun when you ought not to." "You gonna set up and wait for him to come in?" "I'll wait a little anyway." "You're a damn fool." Ezra rolled over and buried his face into the thin hotel pillow. "It'll make him boiling mad to find out you're watching over him like his papa." "Well, maybe," Pat said, and he took a long drag on his cigarette. Ezra began to snore a few minutes later. Pat finished his cigarette and got up restlessly. He went to the window and leaned forward with his palms on the sill, looking down at Marfa's Main Street. It looked like any other cowtown Main Street, the same lit saloons with saddle horses waiting patiently at the hitching rails outside. The same occasional cowboy weaving his way out of a saloon and across the boardwalk to his mount. There was enough moon glow to light the scene for some distance. Pat stayed there at the window a long time, looking downward, but he wasn't thinking about what he was looking at. He was remembering 100 other western cow towns at night, the adventures that had come to him in those towns, other nights of long ago when he had been young and rangy as Dusty Morgan. And he knew what Dusty was thinking right about now. Dusty was too hot-headed to take the sensible course. He didn't care anything about Rosa. Pat knew that. Rosa was just a symbol of youth, the sort of girl a man thinks he wants when he's very young and the red blood runs hot in full veins. Rosa wasn't holding Dusty here in Marfa until past midnight. She was ceasing to be important when she flung herself into that sheriff's arms. But Dusty would stay. Pat Stevens knew that, and he knew he was powerless to prevent whatever was destined to happen. Ezra was right. They couldn't protect Dusty from his destiny. Dusty didn't want protection. Pat sighed deeply and withdrew from the window. He sat down in the chair, pulled off his boots, and then padded over to the washstand in his socks and turned the lamp wick very low. He left the door of the other room wide open, went around the other side of the bed and lay down beside Ezra. In a few moments, the big man's rhythmic snoring lulled him to sleep. He came awake suddenly, in full, complete command of his senses. A single shot had woke him. A second blast followed the first as he sat upright in bed and listened. Both shots had come from a short distance away. Ezra went on snoring. Pat got up and went silently to the window. The moon was higher, shedding more light on Main Street. Most of the saloon lights were out and most of the saddle horses had disappeared. Silence followed the two shots. The saloon doors remained closed and no one appeared in the street. Then Pat's ears caught the faint sound of running feet coming from the left. Hard boot heels resounding on the boardwalk below his window, and a loud shout came echoing through the night from the direction of the previous shots. The running feet pounded into the hotel lobby. Men were beginning to emerge from saloons, gather in little groups on the street. The running man was coming up the stairs, 3 at a leap. Pat turned from the window and saw Dusty Morgan slither to a stop in front of room number 17 and jerk the door open and fling himself inside the room. Another man was running towards the hotel, shouting hoarse words which Pat could not distinguish. Men trotted across the street towards the hotel. Pat shook the bed, and Ezra sat up with a grunt. Before he could ask any questions, Pat directly, quietly, "Go to the head of the stairs and keep everyone down below. Anybody starts up, throw some lead at the landing when they turn. That way you can keep them where they are so they can't get a bead on you." Ezra had taken queer orders from Pat too often before to question this one. Though not more than half awake, he obediently trotted out of the room and stationed himself at the head of the stairwell with a drawn 6-gun. Pat followed him out, but stepped across the hall to the open door of Dusty Morgan's room. The young gunman was lighting a lamp and was leaning across a bulging valise on the bed, desperately trying to strap the buckles. He whirled about with a gun in his hand when he heard Pat on the threshold. He stared for a moment and then said, "Oh, it's you." In the yellow lamplight, his face looked yellow. He seemed older, not a reckless youngster anymore, but a grimly determined man. "Yeah, it's me," Pat said. "I heard a couple shots, then you come running." "That's right." Dusty bent over the suitcase again. He added soberly, "The sheriff's dead." Pat nodded and said, "I was afraid you'd kill him." "But I didn't." Dusty's fingers trembled on the straps. He drew in a long breath and stared at Pat. "I swear I didn't. Someone beat me to it. I followed him down an alley and I heard a shot up ahead. I ran and stumbled over him. I threw one shot up the alley, but whoever done it was gone by that time." Ezra's .45 thundered loudly down the hall. Dusty jumped and stared in that direction, his hand on his gun. "What was that?" "Ezra, he's holding everyone downstairs," Pat told him quietly. "So the sheriff's dead?" "Yeah, he was shot with a bullet in the back. And his gun's still unloaded," Dusty went on bitterly. "Just like you gave it back to him." "Anyone know you were in the alley?" "Not more than half the town. I made my brags. When it was midnight, I went out and looked for him, and no one would ever believe I didn't do it. I gotta get out of town." "Well, I believe you, son." The young man flinched. "Why?" "Because he was shot in the back." Ezra fired again from the head of the stairs. His bellow sounded through the echo of the shot. "Stay down there, you damn fools! I'll kill any man that shows himself on the landing." "Well, you'll be the only one who believes me," Dusty Morgan stated fiercely. Pat nodded in agreement. "Well, you got yourself right behind the 8-ball, kind of looks like." "Well, there's no use you and your partner getting mixed up in it. It's too late to get away now." Dusty dropped the suitcase. "I'll go out and go downstairs." Pat stayed in the doorway. "They'll lynch you without asking questions." "Well, not me. I'll make 'em kill me first." Dusty stopped a foot in front of him. "You're blocking the door." "Other men will get killed too," Pat reminded the youth. "They're doing what they think is right." "I can't help it. It's done now." Dusty's voice rose fiercely. "Get out of my way." "No," said Pat. "Maybe we can think of something." He held up his hand and turned to listen to the sounds coming up the street through the open window of his room. There was loud voices and some angry shouting mingled with the scuffing of boots on the boardwalk outside the hotel. Above that noise came the loud clatter of galloping horses down the street and the jingle of chains and the creak of a wagon. "What time is it?" Pat asked swiftly. "A little past midnight. What's the matter?" "It's too late to matter what time it is now." "Maybe not," muttered Pat. "That's the El Paso stage pulling in. If you could get out the window—" "What good would it do? Even if I did get out of the window and could get on the stage, I'm branded as a murderer. They'll send word ahead to stop the stage." "Sure, the regular stage wouldn't be no good, but there's another one leaves right after the El Paso stage gets in from Jamos." "On the border?" "That's right. If you could get on that." Pat moved Dusty to the window of number 17. He leaned out, looked down, and nodded with satisfaction. "This is right over the alley. Nobody's watching. They think they got you cooped up, and you can't get out except down by the stairs." He snatched up a thin blanket from the bed and began tearing it into strips. "Wait a minute." Dusty's voice was sullen. "If I slip off like this and get away, I'll have to keep on going across the border. There'll never be a chance of proving that I didn't do it." "And how much chance you think you'll have if you go downstairs now and get killed?" "But that's the cleanest way," Dusty argued. "Better than spending the rest of my life as a renegade." "Any way of spending your life is better than not spending it at all," Pat snapped. He was busy tying strips of the blanket together. "A smart man knows when to run away," he went on angrily. "Long as you're alive, there's a chance of coming clear. Only time a man is to give up is when he's dead." He tossed the improvised strips out the window and began tying the end to the bedstead. "I reckon the Hermosa stage starts out from the livery stable. Best way I figure is to slip down the alley and get down the street to a place where the stage will pass right after it starts out. Stop the driver and make him take you. Ezra and me will stay here and keep him downstairs till the stage is gone." "What about my horses when I get to Hermosa?" "Keep right on going across the river at Hermosa. Hole up at Brockno on the other side. We'll be riding that way tomorrow, and we'll bring all 4 horses with us. Get going." Pat stepped back and nodded towards the window. Dusty hesitated another instant. "I don't know why you're helping me." "Because you need help." "Yeah, but you'll get in trouble now." Pat laughed and shook his head. "Not us. Trouble is something me and Ezra sleep with. You get going out of that window before that Hermosa stage takes out." Dusty hesitated with his lips clamped in a thin straight line. Then he nodded and held out his hand. "I've been a bit of a dang fool," he admitted gruffly. Pat gripped his hand. "See you in Brockno in 2 or 3 days." Dusty nodded and slid over the windowsill. Pat leaned down and watched him go down the blanket strips to the shadowed valley. His gaze followed Dusty Morgan's body until it was swallowed up by darkness at the other end of the alley. He turned and went out of the room, grinning down the hall at Ezra, who was crouching barefoot at the head of the stairs with his gun trained on the landing below. Ezra's one eye glared back at him questioningly as he went into room 19 and sat down and began to pull his boots on. Then he picked up Ezra's boots and carried them to him. "Dusty's gone out the window," he announced quietly. "I'll hold him up here while you pull your boots on." "What's all this about?" Ezra grunted. "What do they want him for?" Sheriff's dead. He's been shot in the back." Ezra stared at him for a moment, then said, "You get us into the dangdest of messes." And he began pulling on his boots. End of chapter 5.